everyone, to the fourth annual State of Corporate Technology, the Research Results webinar. My name is Tracy Wilborn, and I'm with Platform 3 Solutions. I will be introducing our presenters today. I just want you to know this is our fourth time with both Tom and Andrew. Andrew Marsh is the Director of Solutions Engineering at Platform 3 Solutions. He is also the co-author, and Tom Rieger is the co-author, presenter, and also our statistician. He's the senior client engineer with EDB, and I am happy they're both here today. Thank you, Tom and Andrew. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tom.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It is great being able to have a fourth annual of these. Having a minor in statistics, I always appreciate having time as a measure, because with time as a measure, we can see how things trend. With that being said, Andrew, is anything else you'd like to state before we start get going here?
No, nothing directly. I'm looking forward to interacting with you, Tom. So yeah, let's kick it off.
All right, in saying that, I want to start with some observations. This is our fourth annual. That means we've had 3 previous years of research. One of the nice things, again, over the last 4 years, there's certain questions we've asked every year so that we can get a trend line around how things are going. But if we take a step back and we think about not just about technology, but kind of above and beyond the technology, what's happened in 4 years? Well, we've entered and mostly exited a pandemic, which also means there are now things we go to called meetings and events, and a new acronym in our 3-letter acronyms, Return to Office, RTO, is abound. And then we look at those things that do affect us more from a technology perspective, things like I can't get servers, I can't get laptops. So that starts to drive people to think about cloud just from an access to technology perspective. The CPU, RAM, disk, and network components of life that we live here as technologists. And then there's talent, and you'll see this come up in our research a bit too, even today in the webinar, around one of the things holding organizations back is having the right mix of talent to do, I'll call it, modern day data processing. With all of this, and of course, it would not be a technology webinar if we weren't going to talk about training, because what's been going on too is it's been reduced to read the manual. It's been reduced to what can you find on YouTube. It's been reduced to spending less on training, which also kind of makes the lack of talent on the street that much more of a problem. And then transformation, it sometimes could be the billboard that's the piece of foam board that's by the elevator shaft when you do go back to the office, talk about how we are transforming today. And it's a conversation, but when you finally start to move workloads or do things with the workloads, the actions are what are imperatives. We also found too, from a more specific vendor perspective, is the world is trying to get off of certain things like Oracle as a database. It's also surprising when it comes to separating the fact from the market fiction around how we saw where Azure is now is the top cloud. And then finally, this why open source conversation is always interesting, because it used to be just about price. Now we see things like innovation and flexibility are as big a topic as price. Andrew, is there anything I missed here when it comes to some observations you've seen over the last 4 years?
Well, one of the things that that I always do, particularly when I'm watching somebody else's webinar, is I see if it passes the sniff test. The second to the bottom bullet, Azure is the top cloud. I imagine some, or if not several, folks on this conference have already Googled to find out that if Azure is the top cloud. I suspect they're going to find out from Google searches that AWS is the top cloud. The thing that's important about the research that we do is the trend line seems to be, the research that we're finding is people are indicating that they're using Azure more and more. And so I don't know if that predicts the future for AWS or not, but it's certainly, when we get into the actual deck itself, into the results, it certainly is indicative of the fact that Azure seems to present that sort of zero entry pool, if you will, for folks to get into the cloud without having to do all their own research on how to get into their cloud environment. Azure makes it easy.
All right, let's continue. Let's start with our first question. This is one that we've asked over and over again, and the latest answers, I think, are in line with what we would expect around the world leans more into thinking that they are transforming things, while a much smaller set of people are either maintaining or cutting costs, or it's really not defined or not sure, which is kind of frightening. If someone in an IT organization or their corporation is not sure just what is your technology strategy, that's a bit of a challenge. Anything that you take away from this, or should we go right to the multi-year conversation, Andrew?
Let's jump into the multi-year conversation. I mean, this is valuable, and again, I think it's reflective of the times. The fact that this year, if you look at the last 3 years, people were way more nervous in general the last 3 years because of pandemics and other things. They didn't know what the future held. People are way more focused, it appears, this year. Everyone knows exactly what they're doing, whether it's transform, cost cut, or maintenance.
Yeah, and I think this trend line too, when you look at especially cost cutting, in 2020, when we started this, the pandemic was just kind of, dare I say, taking hold. And then a year later, the world was, I think, a little more, I'll call it pessimistic. And so you see this blip on the strategy being cost cutting.
Yeah, that's right.
Because nobody was in the office. How do you make decisions if no one's in the office? Oh my gosh. Well, and here we are, and I don't know about everybody else either watching this recording or on this live webinar, but how many webinars or Zoom calls or WebEx calls or whatever calls have you been on the last 4 years? Way too many. So I think coming out of it, the overall pessimism of 2021 turned into more optimism. So now we actually see post-COVID, there's even less cost cutting going on, and we're kind of now more in the let's go do things. Let's go make a difference.
The only thing I wanted to add to that is that in the spirit of everyone recognizing the changes over the last 3 years, I heard the President of the United States the other day talking about getting on a call with other leaders from foreign countries he said, I got on a Zoom call. And I thought, did the President of the United States and Emmanuel Macron really get on a Zoom call, or they have some other technology that they use? I got to imagine it's something else, but it just tells you that it's such a part of the zeitgeist nowadays, getting on Zoom calls, that everybody is familiar with the term. Literally everybody's familiar.
Correct. No, you're exactly right. Next question. What are the top challenges for you to transform in your organizations? Part of what digital transformation is trying to do more with less. So you like to think that something as fundamental as funding would not be a big issue. But you look at the resourcing, as I talked about previously, and even the next one down, infrastructure readiness, the top concerns of the day. But as we look at it from last year to this year, let's look at it over a multi-year stretch. We see where the sourcing is even a bigger issue now than it was perceivably a year ago. But where did the money go? And the readiness is even a bigger issue. But you notice too, governance and compliance is a much lower concern now than it ever was before. So I thought that was interesting in terms of what's holding people back from this push forward in transforming their organization. Is your organization taking a cloud-first perspective for all future projects? And I think, let's just say, if we use the crossing the chasm paradigm, I think we're crossing that chasm when you see, if I add the absolutely yes and getting there is 78% of the world. That's I would say we're done now with most of the world realizing the cloud is an option.
Yeah, and when you jump to the next slide, Tom, and see the trend line, then you can see, look at the no from 2 years ago. That's dropped from 22% down to 4%. So
I'm sure a lot of organizations, if I think about those, cloud first is now, strongly used by organizations and talking about their go forward strategy. But I also see a not sure. You see this not sure going on down here. It's interesting about how we went from 4% being not sure to 15%. It is worth noting a year ago, nobody went to the cloud and reverted back. Now we're seeing little moments where organizations are saying, hey, we took some workloads, we put them out there and we pulled them back into our data center again. So I think that even shows a bit of maybe the speed in which the world is trying to transform themselves, I say with air quotes, but then they have probably financial hiccups where suddenly moving to the cloud is more expensive than the data center and they brought it back.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. And I think maybe I would have changed places between no and not sure. And I would suspect that you go from no to not sure to getting there to absolutely as the human condition, right? Like, no,
Correct.
definitely not doing
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
So I would suspect that, yeah, that not sure is it's just that's the evolution before getting there. And yes.
And I always love to ask questions that get into people's emotional response. And one of those is, do you think there's wasted money in keeping old tech alive in your organization? And what's interesting is really 85% of IT organizations out there have wasted money running. And 28% of those, over a quarter of those in total, have significant amounts. And again, I like to ask this question because it's the individual's perception of waste, not that it's an edict of waste. So the feeling in organizations are we're behind. Everyone feels behind, except for those 15% who they don't think there's wasted money, or they just don't know. And they're just, maybe overly confident.
Yeah, and again, when you jump to the trend line, it's fascinating to see how that we don't see a solid trend here. It jumps around a bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we take the last 4 years and average them and look at the standard deviation, it's pretty solid around people thinking they have wasted money. But to what degree is the big issue?
Yep.
Now, if we also then think to ourselves back to the original question of are we transforming? Are we cutting costs? Are we maintaining things? I think a lot of that is there's a direct correlation between that and what's going on here in old tech. But I do feel that the larger the organization, for them to move workloads out of a data center and into the cloud, they've then got to run in parallel for a while until they finally shut off that old tech they're talking about. That could be a multi-year journey to shut that old tech down. And guess what happens? The tech that was modern today in 4 years is now the new old tech. So it's this I would say this, if we asked this question of IT people 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, I bet it would show the exact same thing. It would just be a different definition of what old is.
Yeah, that's right. And again, this is a conversation that we have at Platform 3 with our customers all the time. And conversations I started multiple years ago with customers, they've got a 5-year plan to shut off the mainframe. And sometimes they don't satisfy that 5-year plan. They're not making it in 5 years. It's a big challenge, particularly for legacy operators, people that have stayed with that legacy tech for a long time.
And it's always fun because this is the right moment to ask the next question. Why, oh, why do you think old systems are still running in your organization? And I think it's interesting where you lack business case. So business case to me means, are we willing to take the risk, the technical risk, but also is anyone done the financial math, the business value assessment and making a change? And without that, senior management would never say yes because they're not going to put their well-being on the line. They need to have one to feed the other. And I think the why has been consistent. Again, what's interesting is also the people who take this research, who participate year over year, can be a big different set of people. And also, I have certain organizations where I had 6 or 8 people from that organization participate this year, and the inconsistencies were abound. But once we kind of average it all out, I think the truth bubbles to the top. All right, next question, please. I love this. Please end this sentence. We are looking to reduce our spend with ... And lo and behold, every year, you'll see this on the next slide, people are done paying for Larry's Island. is the moral of the story. But you also see where people are having a bit of financial hangovers with the likes of Microsoft and IBM. And actually, SAP bubbled up quite a bit. You'll see this here momentarily. Because if we compare it over the last 3 years, this is one area that we here at EDB do all the time around helping organizations get off of Oracle, because we have a version of Postgres called Advanced Postgres that runs Oracle capabilities natively inside Postgres. So we see that top line every day, and it isn't shrinking. But where it does get interesting is when you look at how the likes of SAP and IBM and Teradata have really been going up, up, up. I'm pretty sure you see this all the time to yourself, don't you, Andrew?
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny, more tactically speaking, right? We'll have blips that happen throughout from one year to the next. For example, SAP moving from classic legacy SAP to HANA, right? They change the dynamics of the whole thing. It's no longer run on an Oracle data, SAP on an Oracle database. Now you're running within SAP's environment entirely, and it forces organizations to rethink their entire platform and how they deliver and how much content, how much history, and how much legacy content they keep around, and what do they do with the old stuff. So yeah, that's why SAP I think is number 3, right? Because companies like SAP force that compelling event, and they force it on their customers by saying, hey, listen, if you're switching to HANA, it's going to cost you $1 million per terabyte over 2 terabytes, or whatever the number is, right? So
And I think this is the first year I've noticed too, a growth in the desire to reduce spend with a cloud native technology like Salesforce, going from 4 to 7 to 11%. So it's trending the wrong way for our friends at Salesforce.
well, it's a long in the tooth nowadays. Old
It is
Salesforce is.
long in the tooth.
They're early adopter, right? So they're 20 years old, and I have an old friend who's a competitor, works for a competitor, Salesforce, and his argument is Salesforce runs on something like 7 different platforms behind the scenes in the cloud. So integrating across platforms is ever more challenging, even within Salesforce.
Next question, our research. If your organization has decided on a cloud platform, which ones do they include? And we let people make multiple answers to this, so click all that apply, because we do see where organizations make a multi-cloud decision. And this is where I just want to bubble up how Azure really came to the forefront of this from a who checked those boxes perspective. You please note, I didn't get into cloud platforms and define the subcategories of cloud platforms. So for instance, how many of these people are only running Office 365 in Azure versus using, Azure cloud components to move legacy workloads into Azure? But I think it definitely plays into an interesting narrative here across all of these, especially when you kind of look down at the bottom where it says, we've not decided, or I love the 4% of the people who are saying we're not moving to the cloud. There's a lot of indecisiveness out there right now.
Yeah, and again, it portends a future where Amazon is no longer right? That Amazon was easily an early cloud adopter, so people made enterprise decisions with Amazon.
Yeah.
But so they might have won the battles. Certainly, they won all the battles early on. In my opinion, this portends to a future that maybe Microsoft, in classic Microsoft style, may win the war just by how do you eat the elephant, taking one bite at a time, right? Just one chunk at one chunk at a time away from the big guys. The big guy in this case being Amazon, because
here I think again looking over a 3-year trend line where we see Azure and Amazon are kind of neck and neck out there getting the big plays. While, and again, I'm sure all of you are Googling this right now, what's the market share of people like Google, GCP, because the perception is GCP is not winning the war, while Oracle and IBM are out there just kind of down there getting whatever they can. For instance, Oracle's OCI is, if you're still running PeopleSoft or Siebel, let's just shove that stuff into Oracle. And IBM is probably still a mainframe managed service, dare I say.
I mean, I'm shocked about IBM actually gaining in terms of perception anyway, right? Because that's effectively what this analysis shows. It's perception rather than.
Yep. No, you're exactly right. No,
But
that's always a fun one is the what vendors are you trying to get off of and what clouds are you going to? When it's all said and done, it's all about the hype. And again, this is a very personal type of question is, has the cloud lived up to the hype? And I think this is an interesting area of, well, only 15% are saying absolutely no, which means 85% are saying something but no. But as we look at this over time, even last year to this year, the pivot, kind of that motion towards absolute yes has grown. So if we look at the 11-point growth of absolutely, and that's about a 12-point reduction in somewhat. So the people who were probably somewhat last year are now saying absolutely, while the no's and the not sure's have grown. So we have this larger divide in some cases.
yeah, and you get again, right? This is I love the this could be the mood of the day, right? Depending on who you're asking and when you're asking them, right?
For sure.
The people the people that are saying no, and there's an increase in the no's, they might be people that went to the cloud 8 years ago, and that it's just another platform as far as they're concerned, and it's old
Correct.
hat to them at this point, right? So
Correct. I have to mix up the graphics here a little bit. I was getting sick of bar charts, so I made this one a pie. It just made sense. Is a data archival and application decommissioning strategy built into your move to the cloud? The way this move to the cloud works, the way anything works in changing out platforms is you got to turn the old stuff off to turn new stuff on.
yeah, well, the thing that strikes me about this one, Tom, is that not that there's 51% yes, but there's 49% that either say no or they don't know. Like,
Right.
so you move again, if you're moving in content to the cloud, if you're decomming old applications and migrating to the cloud, if you don't have a strategy with what to do with your old data and or applications, they're just going to sit there and consume money until you make that decision. So 49% of the people that responded to the survey are saying, I don't know what we're still spending money. And again, it points back to our earlier slide that says, is there wasted money? That's because when you're making this decision to move to the cloud, 49% of the time people are saying, well, let's figure that out later.
Yeah, it's not part of the narrative. And then over time, even looking at last year versus this year around this same question, the uncertainty is there. Yes, you get a little bit more uptick on the yeses, and you get a little more
Yep.
downtick on the no's because I don't know. So to your point, whether it's last year or this year, you have almost about half saying yes and about half saying I don't know or no. What are the main funding streams for cloud migrations? This is always fun, especially the second one, because if you have to remove tech to pay for your cloud migrations, doing that math plays back to the business case conversation around why can't you, why can't you? Well, you need to be able to remove the old to bring in the new, while you do have moments of new projects, so net new growth in budgets. But I would bet all of us listening to this webinar right now are not given blank checks for anything, and we're dealing with less funding to do more.
Well, and the thing that fascinates me so much about this, particularly as the macro of the survey, is that people are saying they're wasting money on old projects. They don't know what they're doing with the old data, but they're still moving forward, even though they're not getting rid of the old tech, right? So new technologies that fund those new projects, it just all it's doing is increasing the IT spend rather than replacing old IT spend. So
Right.
it's it's such a conundrum that it deserves. Again, this is what we do at Platform Tree, so this is why it's a conundrum for me. Like, how is this a problem that shouldn't be very easy to solve? And I think it just requires that focus that people need to make that decision. We need to figure out how to help people make that decision earlier in that process when they're deciding to move.
Here's always a fun one. What are the top reasons to move to the cloud? And these kind of cover a spectrum of those things you can measure, like speed or cost savings, and those things you can't measure, like innovation. But then, of course, as I have stated a couple of times, and then there's always that CIO or CTO edict called cloud first. And then there's, of course, the 80-20 rule, in this case, 85-15 of we're not sure what the top reason is to move to the cloud.
Yeah.
When old technology needs to be retired, does your organization have a formal process? So one thing to do it, but do you have a formal process to do it? And I think where, the previous question around how over half said yes, we do it, but now you only have less than half, 41% saying, yeah, we actually have a formal process to do it. That gets kind of scary around things like just where's my data? Does your organization consider data retention and governance of the legacy data in your transformations? What's scary here is all the ways Tom Rieger or Andrew Marsh exists in databases somewhere all over the place. And as they change that platform, what happens to those Tom Rieger and Andrew Marsh records? And, is that taken into consideration when it comes to pick your data retention and governance law or lawsuits or legal reasons that come into play?
Yeah, exactly. And again, this is a one that confounds me as well, is that there's so many reasons to consider what to do with the old stuff as part of the decision about what to do with the new stuff. How do we get more engagement with addressing that old stuff? Because it just seems more and more clear the more time that we spend. And certainly that's true with our trend lines too over time.
Why do you think open source is thriving? I live this every day. And let's think about open source. 20 years ago, open source didn't really exist. You had Linux, Postgres came out of Berkeley and was always open source. But the overall definition and legal aspects in making open source be real have been around for 20 years. So I think we've all had a chance to make these moves at different parts of our infrastructure into using open source. But why? And of course, clearly, and I think it's very interesting how the top three are all within a few points of each other. It isn't just about the lowest price, because as all of us had mothers and grandmothers say to us, nothing is free. But where things are happening now and next, and how I can do them better. I work here at EDB with clients all the time, telling me just war stories of how they are limited in using their SQL Server or Oracle licenses to do what they need to for their business because of the terms and conditions in the contracts. We're here at EDB and how we support Postgres. We don't care where you run it. It's the same price and you get the same level of support. Any questions? Do you see any aspects of this when it comes to what your clients are up to, Andrew?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It piques my interest, Tom. What piques my interest specifically about this is when they see lower price, when somebody does make a move to EDB, they migrate from Oracle to EDB. Do they then actively renegotiate contracts with Oracle for a lower spend, or is that kind of forgotten as part of that?
That's a great question. In fact, that's an integral part of the business case conversation. As we mentioned earlier in the research, I'm lacking a business case. Well, sometimes that business case is if the layperson reads an Oracle contract, they feel like they are stuck in that marriage forever. But where we come into play and where we help clients is to identify where there's chinks in the armor, how we can help that organization stop helping pay for Larry's Island in Hawaii, and how they can reduce that spend to the point to where it's almost cheaper to say, you know what, Oracle, I'm going to throw my old contract away, and whatever I have left, I'm just going to buy a net new contract. So, because if you think about what Oracle costs, the math, we're 5, 6, 7 times cheaper, not 5 or 6, 7 percentage points, but times.
Yeah.
Because that's what you need to be to affect a transformative play in technology. Whether it was the mainframe to open systems or it's from open systems to the cloud, every time you make a major platform shift, you need to do twice as much for 3 times less, period.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. No, it's certainly the concept of, hey, listen, I need to renegotiate my Oracle contract. Hey, listen, you already bought the car. If you want a smaller car, you've got to sell your car and buy a smaller car.
Correct. And that's a great analogy. And it even plays into the terms and conditions. Again, looking at change over time. This is 2 years ago, 2021, we asked a question, and then we waited a year and we ran it again. I think between, let's say, Oracle 12 going end of life, and you see changes in how
Yep.
they go out there and they sell, their need to audit clients and to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt has grown. And that's where you're seeing things like terms and conditions bubbling up behind the scenes as being a bigger reason to go to open source. We would be remiss, would we not, Andrew, if we did not ask a question about artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Yeah.
What level of activity around AI and ML is in your company? And I think the buzzwords that are AI and ML have really bubbled up in 5 years. It's amazing how quickly you see currently investigating and yes being the major two blips on this radar. Do you have any insights in what you see about our clients, Andrew?
Well, nearly 80%, right? And difficult to say at the moment because it's at this point it's the hype cycle has reached the general public, and so difficult to say exactly how it's going to apply. Certainly in the very short term to business. But yeah, no, I totally agree. This is everybody in the world is talking about AI taking jobs and AI doing your job for you and AI making your life easier.
So let's kind of sum things up. Andrew, you want to take a first swat at these?
Transformational is the strategy of the day. Yes. Obviously, you guys can see that from our respondents to that survey, everybody is in the process or considering. Nearly everybody's in the process of considering transformation, and obviously, transformation means slightly different things depending on what you're asking and what the person's doing that you're asking to, but it's top of mind for most everybody that we asked. You hit the next one, Tom.
Cloud, and this is me writing this to spite itself. Cloud is still growing. To me, again, I use the mainframe to open systems to cloud kind of primary platform generational changes. And the cloud is making us think like we're mainframe programmers all over again. You have to start counting things like IOPS and throughput on a disk. And you have so many choices of computing environments out there. What's the right one? And if I choose the wrong one, they're all going to cost me too much money, or it's not going to be as performant. So the cloud is still growing to spite itself, but I think that we're seeing a lot more going on around cost containment in all of this, because I think the world is trying to get out of, just like Henry Ford owned a hydroelectric dam in St. Paul, Minnesota, because he needed to create electricity to build cars. That's almost like where we are with data centers today in organizations, is people are deciding, you know what, I don't need a data center. Let me just go subscribe to the services, just like a car plant does in hooking up to the power grid.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and it plays into the next one of validating the cloud is worth it, polarizing and uncertainty. Because let's not forget, it was 2 weeks ago, AWS had US East 2 region go out for 228 minutes, and it caused a lot of people to have consternation in their business and their kids not able to watch Netflix for 228 minutes. You've got still that need to have the electricity not turn off.
I think some of that polarizing and uncertain component to that is, remember back when phones were new, everybody was excited about the next version of the iPhone or the next version of the Android phone. That's because it was all new and exciting, and hey, this one's got this feature and that feature, all new features. And nowadays it's just, hey, is the camera better than the last camera? Now that it's matured enough, it's just a matter of, it's less sexy and exciting nowadays, and it's more about how do we maximize our opportunity by taking advantage of the technologies that are available to us.
Correct. Well, and you mentioned too, the uncertainties is over half of corporate America have an uncertain or no plan in how to best decommission old tech.
Yeah.
It makes me think about back in my youth, how long did it take for an organization to decommission a card punch machine compared to what it takes to finally get, in fact, I was talking to a client last week and they proudly stated, we have some of the largest AS400 servers in the world still running our business. And I almost wanted to say to him, I'm sorry, are you proud of that fact? Act of getting old tech out. I mean, gosh, even just the kilowatt hours they're burning to keep this an old box running is mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing, truly is. And again, I think this is there's a trend line that we haven't really seen anywhere yet that's approaching. We're going to hit that point of precipitation where everyone is going to, where technology is going to be mature enough and people are going to be certain enough that they know how to get rid of their data. And it seems more and more clear that maybe it's something like GDPR or CCPA, which is now sort of spreading its wings all over the country. I know where I live in Colorado, they've got consumer data privacy acts just being released. They're just starting to take hold. And so it's really forcing organizations to have to make decisions about managing their old data, whether that's making a business decision to keep it, anonymize it, or do something with it, act upon that old data that's just spinning on disk somewhere.
Because I know when I see organizations doing this pivot to the cloud, they start with the narrative of, hey, we've got 180 terabytes in this Oracle environment. Let's just move all 180 terabytes up into the cloud.
Yeah,
charge me by the gigabyte, charge me by the IOP, and charge me by the throughput. And then they wonder why they're not getting the cost benefit analysis out of that move. And to your point, I bet of that 180 terabytes, probably 2/3 of that could be either archived or just plain deleted.
Yep. That's probably some mix thereof, right? So a third of it deleted, third archived, something like that. But again, that people are going to learn to get smarter and more intelligent about making that business decision and how to make that business decision in the very near future. If cost is not the only reason, government regulation is going to be another one that comes right over the top on.
And then as organizations are getting off of some combination of Oracle, reducing their spend with SAP, getting off of legacy things like Teradata and IBM, and they're moving into the cloud, and we see Azure kind of out there in the forefront. AWS is no slouch on their front, but the other ones are kind of also RANs to some degree. It's also worth noting when we come out with the research paper, because we let people choose multiple boxes, one of the things we want to call out is how many people just chose one cloud. And if they chose more than one cloud, which ones were in that mix? So I think that's where you start getting into this idea of single sourcing a cloud, or if they're deciding they want to have a multi-cloud strategy, who are those multi-cloud vendors? And then finally, relatively low legacy retention and governance identified. It's just the
fuddling as well.
The technical debt, the data debt, right, that goes on there is just mind blowing to me. And how many ways is Andrew Marsh or Tom Rieger existing in systems out there, and they just don't need to anymore?
That's going to be the government compliance punch in the face that is going to jump to the top of our survey results in the coming years. I don't know if it's going to happen right away, but again, GDPR is the oldest of the bunch, and you see fines and you see results happening. It's top of mind for everybody in Europe. CCPA is a couple of years behind it, but now all these others are coming along. There's 5 more that came online certainly within the last 12 or next 12 months. And then over the next 5 years, there's 20 or 22 more states that are going to be introducing some sort of consumer data protection requirement. So my expectation is that it's going to jump right to the top of the list.
It's like managing sales tax if you're a retailer and you sell to every state and every city.
Yes.
Just managing that from a governance and data retention perspective is going to be, let's just say, if you're looking to become a chief information security officer or a data retention specialist, I think you're guaranteed employment for the foreseeable future.
Platform 3 Solutions is, we're a global leader in data management, certainly legacy data archive and migration of content from legacy systems into systems like Postgres. We're a partner of EDB, and we help companies migrate their data into Postgres environments. We also help people make decisions about whether to move their data into EDB or whether to move it into archive, or actually make intelligent decisions about whether to dispose of some of that legacy content.
because especially as you go into the cloud, everything costs money. Nickels and
That's
dimes
right.
add up to hundreds of dollars very, very quickly in the cloud.
No, that's
And
right. That's our cost justification is very, very simple. The reason people choose our product is, does it save them money, and does it allow them to have access to their data? Those are, and does it provide that compliance? And that's really the core of everything that we do.
absolutely. And here at EDB, we're the largest purveyors of Postgres to the world. So we have almost 1,000 employees doing nothing but making Postgres better, better supported, more training, better professional services, and along with the technologies around it, so you can best manage, keep it running 24/7, move things in and out of Postgres from a migration perspective, create all those connectivity points, and also run it on whatever platform you want. Because the platform conversation shifted quite a bit over the last 5 years. Now we start adding words like Kubernetes and containers. We look at SaaS, IaaS, DBaaS. There's all kinds of AASs out there to choose from. So we want to make sure that we give you the best amount of automations, but also the best amount of control when you want to go into that fully managed environment, and finally inherit all the value out of what open source brings to you from an innovation perspective, terms and conditions perspective, and also save you a lot of money. Again, how do we help you do twice as much for 3 times less? I'd like to mention that Andrew and I are working on the white paper and an infographic. These are examples of what we did last year, and expect to hear from us again after this webinar and recording around when this paper and infographic are ready. Within the paper, it will be more detailed than what you heard today on the webinar, and getting into and drilling into the data a bit more by industry, by geography, by company size, for instance. And expect to see that here later this summer. Anything else, Andrew?
No, I wanted to say a quick thank you everyone for joining and listening in. We spent on this.
And if you have any questions for Andrew and I, here's our email address right here on the screen. But definitely reach out to us if you have any particular questions which you heard today. And with that being said, we'd like to thank you.